Welcome to the parallels between the Legend of Enoch and Joseph Smith video. Okay, so where did Joseph Smith get this idea to engrave on golden plates? Well, one answer may be the Bible. Exodus chapter 28, it says the following, "And thou shalt make a plate of pure gold, and grave upon it, like the engravings of a signet, holiness to the Lord." And it may have looked like something similar to pictured above. So there you have it. In the Bible, it talks about engraving on plates of gold or a plate of gold. And it says holiness to the Lord, which is a Masonic saying that the Mormons also used. Okay, another answer may be the Apocrypha of the King James Version of the Bible, the apocryphal books that didn't make it into a lot of the editions nowadays. First Maccabees in the Apocrypha Chapter 8, it says, "And this is the copy of the epistle or the letter which the Senate wrote back again in tables of brass and sent to Jerusalem." So they're writing a letter from the Senate in tables of brass. And so maybe that's where Joseph Smith got the idea for the plates of brass in the Book of Mormon. And another example in the Apocrypha, again, First Maccabees chapter 14, "They wrote unto him in tables of brass." So again, the idea of writing on brass tables or plates. Okay, so let's get into the Legend of Enoch. Here's a statement by John L. Brooke, The Refiner's Fire book, 1994. For years, Joseph Smith had been fascinated with the prophet Enoch. His discovery of the golden plates echoed the Masonic tale of Enoch, or the Legend of Enoch, and here is Enoch pictured in some stained glass window. Okay, a statement from Fawn Brody, "No man knows my history. There is good evidence that Joseph Smith was familiar with Masonic literature even before the murder of William Morgan." So there's probably a very good chance Joseph Smith read this kind of stuff, and people that were close to him, like Oliver Cowdery, Parley P. Pratt, Hiram Smith, etc., probably reading some Masonic literature. Literature like William Morgan's Illustrations of Masonry. If you compare that to the Mormon Temple Endowment Ceremony, there are a ton of similarities and some basically just direct plagiarism. Okay, so Fawn Brody talks about the Legend of Enoch in her book. She says the Masons had adopted the ancient Kabbalistic figure of Enoch, son of Jared, who was said to have had a vision on the hill Moriah of a cavern which contained an engraved golden plate and a pillar of brass holding a metal ball with magical qualities. So, of course, there's a lot of similarities here. A cavern, or a big hole in the ground, an engraved golden plate, very similar to the golden plates, a pillar of brass, similar to the plates of brass in the Book of Mormon that had engravings on them, and the pillar of brass holding a metal ball, which maybe Joseph Smith interpreted as the Liahona. So we'll go more into this. Okay, Fawn Brody continues. King Solomon puts these treasures into his temple, along with the brass records and the sacred Urim and Thummim. Joseph Smith's adaptation of these myths will be obvious to any student of the Book of Mormon and the history of its writing. Pictured above, we have one artist's rendition of what the Urim and Thummim looked like. I guess that's Hebrew writing on there, I'm not sure. And it even talks about Solomon's temple in the Book of Mormon. And it says the Nephites actually built a temple after the manner of the Temple of Solomon. So that's kind of interesting. The Masons trace back a lot of their history back to the Temple of Solomon as well. And just by way of reiteration, Fawn Brody says, engraved golden plates, brass plates, a magical ball called the Liahona, the Urim and Thummim, and the treasure cave in the hill were all incorporated into Joseph Smith's story and into his book, the Book of Mormon. All right, a passage from Gerald and Sandra Tanner's book, Mormonism, Magic, and Masonry, 1988. Since Joseph Smith was involved in magic and money digging or treasure digging, he must have had a keen interest in legends relating to these matters. And, you know, the legend of Enoch is one of those legends of treasure digging. All right, so let's get into more of what this legend of Enoch is. We're going to quote quite a bit from Dr. Reed C. Durham's paper, or it was basically a presentation at the Mormon History Association convention in Nauvoo, Illinois, 1974. It created quite a stir in the Mormon underground community, as it was taped and copied and disseminated in the underground. He's a Mormon guy. He was the director of LDS Institute at the University of Utah. He was also the president of the Mormon History Association at this time in 1974. So he says, there is a famous legend of Enoch, which the Grant orator elaborates in lecture form in the ceremonies of the 13th, 14th, and 21st degrees of Masonry, which has some very ancient roots, bearing a remarkable similarity to Mormonism. So this legend of Enoch, it bears a remarkable similarity to Mormonism, according to Dr. Reed C. Durham. Pictured above is another picture of Enoch. Okay, Reed Durham continues. The roots of the legend extend back into ancient Hebrew traditions, but were developed most nearly as they are now found in Masonry out of ancient Kabbalistic lore and mythology. Okay, Reed Durham continues. The refinements of the legend of Enoch and their incorporation into modern Masonry began in France about 1740 to 1760, but the legend was in American Masonic print by 1802, so way in advance of Joseph Smith, the Book of Mormon, and the Mormon Church. And by Joseph Smith's time, many publications had made the legend popularly well disseminated. The legend of Enoch by Joseph Smith's time was made very popular, and it was well disseminated in Joseph Smith's area. Okay, Durham continues. The legend states that up in the pre-existence there was a special secret doctrine that was given by deity, and it was given down to the earth, first to Adam, and Adam then was to carefully guard this secret doctrine because it contained all the mysteries. It contained the knowledge of God, and the name it contained was the sacred name of God, maybe as pictured above. Adam then bestowed it upon his son Seth, who guarded it very carefully, only among the inner circle of believers, and then it was handed down until it came to Enoch. And of course, we know that Joseph Smith had his inner circle of believers, the temple, people that went through the temple endowment, the Danites, the Council of 50, all his inner circle. Okay, Durham continues. Enoch is the central figure in the legend. It is with Enoch that the remarkable resemblances with Joseph Smith and Mormon history become disconcertingly clear. So, saying there's a lot of remarkable resemblances between what happened with Joseph Smith and his story and the legend of Enoch. The parallels of Joseph Smith and the history of Mormonism with the legend of Enoch are so unmistakable that to explain them only as a coincidence would be ridiculous. How does a Mormon historian interpret Joseph Smith and the Masonic Enoch legend? The parallels demand an answer. Was this an extreme grabbing on by the prophet? Grabbing on, I guess, copying from the legend of Enoch? And Durham continues, I do not believe that the Nauvoo story can adequately be told without an inquiry into Masonry. Okay, so probably the best account of this Legend of Enoch was written down in 1802 by Thomas S. Webb in a book entitled Freemason's Monitor. So we're going to use this basically to talk about what this legend is in more detail. I like using as many primary sources as I can, and so that's what we're doing in this case. All right, so Webb says Enoch, the son of Jared, was the sixth son in descent from Adam. God appeared to him in a vision, and a mountain seemed to rise to the heavens, and Enoch was transferred to the top thereof, where he beheld a triangular plate of gold most brilliantly enlightened, and upon which were some characters which he received a strict injunction never to pronounce. So a lot of similarities, right? Joseph Smith had a vision. We'll talk about that on the next slide. He had plates of gold upon which were characters in the Joseph Smith story. And as we know, Joseph Smith also received a vision concerning golden plates. Okay, Thomas Webb continues. Presently, he seemed to be lowered perpendicularly into the bowels of the earth through 9 arches, in the 9th or the deepest of which he saw the same brilliant plate which was shewn to him in the mountain. So similar to Joseph Smith's story, golden plates buried in the bowels of the earth, which were brilliant gold. All right, and here's a representation of those 9 arches. You can see the top of this where the ground is, and they're one on top of another. They go down deeper and deeper into the earth, 9 arches deep, and then the bottom of which, in the bowels of the earth, they find the triangular plate of gold with the mysterious engravings on it. Okay, Enoch, being inspired by the Most High and in commemoration of this wonderful vision, built a temple underground. This happened in that part of the world which was afterwards called the land of Canaan, and since known by the name of the Holy Land. You can see on this map where Canaan is, just north of Jerusalem and Jericho. Okay, Thomas Webb continues. Enoch, in imitation of what he had seen, caused a triangular plate of gold to be made, each side of which was a cubit long, and a cubit is 18 inches. So it was in the shape of a triangle as pictured above, had the holy name of God on it in Hebrew as pictured above. Each side of the triangle was a cubit long or 18 inches long. Enoch then engraved upon it the same ineffable characters which God had shown to him, and placed it on a triangular pedestal of white marble, which he deposited in the 9th or the deepest arch. So there was engravings upon this golden plate, just like the golden plates for the Book of Mormon. Okay, the account continues. Enoch built 2 great pillars on the top of the highest mountain. The one was of brass to withstand the water, and the other was of marble to withstand fire. And he engraved on the marble pillar Egyptian hieroglyphics, signifying that there was a most precious treasure concealed in the arches underground, which he had dedicated to God. So interesting. We got a pillar made of brass, so it's kind of similar to the plates of brass in the Book of Mormon. We have engravings on a marble pillar in Egyptian hieroglyphics. And of course, the Book of Mormon was supposedly written in Reformed Egyptian. So that's a similarity here to this Legend of Enoch. Also, Joseph Smith translated, quote unquote, the Book of Abraham from Egyptian hieroglyphics as well. So we're pointing out the parallels here. Here is a picture, I guess, in a Masonic lodge of 2 of the Enochian pillars with the balls on top. And the balls, they look like maps. We'll talk about those more later. Okay, an Oliver Cowdery letter to W. W. Phelps in 1835 can be found in the Messenger and Advocate newspaper of the Mormon Church. And in regards to the golden plates, he also talks about 3 small pillars. So where did he get this idea of the pillars? It was probably from the Enochian legend. All right, when Oliver Cowdery described Joseph Smith's recovery of the chest containing the golden plates, he mentioned 3 small pillars which stood upright, and upon them was placed the record of the children of Joseph and of a people who left the tower far, far before the days of Joseph. Okay, the stone box where Joseph Smith found these golden plates, Oliver Cowdery continues to describe it here. He says, from the bottom of the box, or from the breastplate, arose 3 small pillars composed of the same description of cement used on the edges. And upon these 3 pillars was placed the record. So this is a very Masonic idea. All right, so in the same letter again, Oliver Cowdery says, the pillars were not so lengthy as to cause the plates and the crowning stone to come into contact. So we can kind of get an idea of what this crowning stone may have looked like from the picture above. There was enough room in there for the pillars and the plates, so it's not the smallest hole, and we have some other accounts that it was actually a cave. And in another account, we have Oliver Cowdery talking about this Enochian pillar again. When he is describing some of the Joseph Smith papyri, as pictured above, this papyri is from the book of Joseph. It was never translated. He did the book of Abraham, but he never did the book of Joseph. I guess he died too soon. This was a project that he was going to get around to. But in this Egyptian papyri, Oliver Cowdery saw this picture, and he said this picture represented Enoch's pillar as mentioned by Josephus. So that's interesting. And in Josephus, it does talk about a pillar of Enoch's descendants, I think of Seth. So that's interesting. Oliver Cowdery had this idea, of Enoch's pillar. But of course, Oliver Cowdery's translation of the picture on the former slide was wrong. That was not Enoch's pillar. Oliver Cowdery using his imagination. So what does the picture really represent? Well, it is the deceased striding in front of a pillar, which represents the city Heliopolis. I guess an ancient Egyptian city called Heliopolis. You can kind of see what the city may have looked like from this picture. And we have this pillar here kind of on the right-hand side that represents the city Heliopolis. Okay, it is also interesting to note that Lucy Mack Smith, Joseph Smith's mother, also talked about these 4 pillars being in this cave or in this stone box. This is from her History of Joseph Smith preliminary manuscript. So the preliminary manuscript has a lot of differences from the one that was actually published by the church. So you can get some interesting details from the rough draft, I guess, where she talks about these 4 pillars. So she says, when the time arrived, Joseph Smith went to the place appointed and removed the moss and grass from the surface of the rock, and then pried up the flat stone according to the directions which he had received. He then discovered the golden plates laying on 4 pillars inside of the box. So a very Masonic idea. And Joseph Smith also talks about what else was in the box. Messenger and Advocate, 1835, he says, also inside the box was a breastplate, glasses or the Urim and Thummim, the sword of Laban, and the ball or compass, or the Liahona. And, several of these things have significance within Masonry as well. All right, so let's get back to Thomas Webb's account. And he engraved upon the pillar of brass the principles of the liberal arts, particularly of Masonry. So interesting. Engraving on this pillar the principles of the liberal arts, or particularly of the Masonry, or the history of Masonry. So similar to the brass plates in the Book of Mormon. Okay, so the plates of brass in the Book of Mormon also had engravings upon them. Of course, Nephi went back for them. These plates of brass contained Egyptian engravings, similar to that marble pillar in Masonry. Egyptian engravings, which included a record of the Jews to the reign of Zedekiah, the 5 books of Moses, and the book of Isaiah, as well as his family's genealogy. You can read about this in Michael W. Homer's book, Joseph's Temples, the Dynamic Relationship Between Freemasonry and Mormonism. Okay, getting back to Reed Durham's account, he says, this brass pillar had a metal ball on its top. All right, so what were these balls or these globes? Thomas Webb talks about this. He says the globes or the balls are 2 artificial spherical bodies. They are in the convex surface of which are represented the countries, seas, and various parts of the earth, the face of the heavens, the planetary revolutions, and other particulars. So basically they are maps. They are maps that represent the countries, the seas, etc. of the earth, and also of the universe, the heavens, the planetary revolutions. So this idea of maps or globes, is that going to be similar to the Liahona? Okay, so Webb continues. He says the sphere with the parts of the earth delineated on its surface, in other words, maps, is called the Terrestrial Globe, and that with the constellations and other heavenly bodies or maps of the universe is called the Celestial Globe. So pictured above, we have 3 Masonic pillars here, one representing the sun, one representing the moon, and the other one with a guy's bust on it. I'm not sure who that is. But anybody who knows about Mormonism, studies Mormonism, knows about the 3 kingdoms of glory: the celestial, the terrestrial, and the telestial. So Joseph Smith may have gotten these ideas also from Masonry, maybe from this book, particularly the Freemasons Monitor book in 1802, where it talks about these globes being terrestrial and celestial. Okay, Webb's account continues. Their principal use of the balls on top of the pillars, besides serving as maps to distinguish the outward parts of the earth, so there he calls them maps, and the situation of the fixed stars, is to illustrate and explain the phenomena arising from the annual resolution and the diurnal rotation of the earth around its own axis. So notice how he uses the language of fixed stars. Well, Joseph Smith also used that language in facsimile number 2 in the book of Abraham. He talks about fixed stars. So Joseph Smith may have gotten that idea as well from this Freemasons Monitor. Okay, so these globes and balls were not only maps, but they are the noblest instruments for improving the mind and giving it the most distinct idea of any problem or proposition, as well as enabling it to solve the same. So improving the mind, giving it the most distinct idea of any problem or proposition, kind of like a crystal ball, I guess, as well as enabling it to solve the same. And it's interesting to note that the Liahona was not only used as a compass,
but it would have words written upon it to give the Lehi family and the Nephi family ideas of how to solve problems. So that's pretty interesting. And the professor Jack H. Adamson also talked about this in a paper entitled "The Treasure of the Widow's Son," which probably came out around 1960, but they're not sure. He says the Liahona in the Book of Mormon could also impart ideas. When the steel bows of the sons of Lehi lose their spring and Nephi breaks his bow, the little band faces starvation. And we have a representation of the Liahona pictured above. And this is what it says in the Book of Mormon, 1 Nephi chapter 16. In this peril they pray mightily. The Lord said to look upon the ball, or the Liahona, and behold the things which are written. And there was also written upon the ball a new writing, which was plain to be read, which did give us understanding concerning the ways of the Lord. So advice, basically. And it was written and changed from time to time according to the faith and diligence which we gave unto it. So, similar to the function of those Masonic balls or spheres. And Michael W. Homer talks about this in his article, Similarity of Priesthood and Masonry, Dialogue, A Journal of Mormon Thought, 1994, in the fall. He says, parallels include similarities between the Liahona, and he's talking about parallels between the Legend of Enoch and Joseph Smith. Similarities between the Liahona, a ball used by Lehi and his family to guide them to the New World, which was also discovered by Joseph Smith in the Hill Cumorah. So there were similarities between the Liahona and the mystical hollow sphere which stood atop Enoch's brass pillar, which was carved with maps of the world and universe. So scholars are recognizing this similarity. Okay, Thomas Webb continues. After the flood, the marble pillar of Enoch fell in the general destruction, but by divine permission, the pillar of brass withstood the water, by which means the ancient state of the liberal arts, and particularly Masonry, has been handed down to us. Now, I'm going to quote a passage in the Book of Mormon which is similar, and they're talking about ancient information. They're talking about secret combinations, secret societies like Masonry, and how they have been handed down to us. So look at the similarities between this and the next slide. Okay, here's the passage, 3 Nephi chapter 3, verse 9. And behold, I am Gideonhi, and I am the governor of this, the secret society of Gadianton. Notice, secret society, like Masonry. Which society and the works thereof I know to be good, and they are of ancient date, just like it said on the last slide, and they have been handed down unto us. And they have been handed down unto us, just like it said on the last slide. So, was Joseph Smith or whoever wrote the Book of Mormon using that work by Thomas Webb, Freemasonry Monitor, in writing the Book of Mormon? This is an interesting parallel here, I think. Okay, Webb continues. To Moses, God communicated his divine law. He also gave him the true pronunciation of his sacred name, which he told him should be found by some of his descendants, engraven upon a plate of gold. So, yeah, kind of compare this to Moroni burying the ancient Book of Mormon record, I guess in upstate New York, that should be found by some of his descendants, namely Joseph Smith. Okay, Solomon caused a cavern to be built under the temple, to which he gave the name of the secret vault. He erected in this vault a large pillar of white marble.
And then Professor Adamson says this: King Solomon's vault contained this treasure, along with a collection of other sacred objects, the breastplate of the high priest of Israel, and the Urim and Thummim. So similar to what Joseph Smith found in his box or in his cave. Okay, Webb's account continues. In looking for the treasure, one of Solomon's architects found a large stone perfectly square. With much difficulty they raised it when the mouth of a deep and dismal cavern appeared. So very similar to the pictures we see of Joseph Smith prying up a large stone to get into the vault or into the cavern. Solomon's architect descended down the cavern, and when he descended into the ninth arch, a parcel of stone and mortar suddenly fell in and extinguished his light, and he was immediately struck with the sight of a triangular plate of gold, maybe as pictured above. Okay, here is an illustration of Enoch's plate and the underground vault where it was deposited. So if you look down, it's got to be 9 arches down. That little tiny triangular plate at the bottom. It's a pretty bright plate. It lights up the place. This is published in Jeremy L. Cross, The True Masonic Chart. All right, Thomas Webb continues. All of Solomon's architects examined the golden plate more particularly. They also observed certain characters engraved thereon, of the meaning of which they were then ignorant. And, you know, the triangle is a significant symbol in Masonry, as you can see pictured above. You know, the all-seeing eye is shown at the very pinnacle of the Masonic triangle, and you can see that actually on the back of the dollar bill. All right, Solomon and the king of Tyre looked at the plate, and they were struck with amazement. So interesting, that phrase rang a bell for me, struck with amazement. I thought, that might be in the Book of Mormon. So I look it up, and it is. Book of Mormon, Alma chapter 36, Helaman chapter 5, and Mosiah 25. Not sure how rare of a phrase that is, struck with amazement. I don't think it's too common. But it's interesting that it shows up, 3 places in the Book of Mormon. And so again, get maybe that idea that Joseph Smith or whoever wrote the Book of Mormon used Thomas Webb's book, Freemason's Monitor, as one of their sources. Okay, the 2 kings examined the sacred characters with attention, but would not explain them to the 3 Grand Master Architects. He, Solomon, further promised them an explanation of the sacred and mysterious name and characters of the golden plate. So that's interesting. Explaining them, or translating them, in Joseph Smith's case, explaining the sacred and mysterious characters. So kind of the idea of translating. Okay, Webb continues. Solomon then explained to them how the promise of God made to Noah, Moses, and his father David was now accomplished. That promise which assured them that in the fullness of time his name should be discovered engraved upon a plate of gold. And that's another phrase, fullness of time, that shows up in the Book of Mormon. You can find that in 2 Nephi chapter 2, verse 3 and 26, and also 2 Nephi chapter 11, verse 7. Again, I'm not sure how rare of a statement that is, fullness of time, but it does show up. Okay, they worked there together and encrusted the golden plate upon the pedestal of the pillar of beauty, happy in being employed in so glorious a work. The brilliancy of the plate and the jewels were of themselves sufficient to give light to the place. So that's a similar statement to something Brigham Young said, that the plates were so bright that they gave light to the place or to the room. The pillar of beauty, that may be what they're talking about in this picture above. You got the pillar of wisdom, which is Solomon, king of Israel. Pillar of strength, which is Hiram, king of Tyre. And pillar of beauty, which is Hiram Abiff. 3 different pillars in Masonry. So I put this statement in by the prophet Brigham Young because it talks about the similarity of the conditions of the light, how those golden plates gave light to the room. So prophet Brigham Young, 1877, Brigham Young said there was a large cave in the hill Cumorah where the golden plates were found, and that when Oliver Cowdery entered the cave, he did not think at the time whether they had the light of the sun or artificial light, but that it was just as light as day. So kind of the same idea as the last slide. It's the idea that these golden plates are so bright that they just light up the room. Okay, the 2 kings then changed the name of the place from the secret to the sacred vault, and explained to them the sacred characters engraven upon the golden plate. So the idea of translating 2 kings able to do that. They're talking about the name of the place being changed from secret to sacred. That's also an idea that comes up in Mormonism regarding temples. Some of the masters decided to go to the ancient ruins and search underground. They discovered the iron by means of which they raised the square stone and found the entrance into the arches. And from Adamson's paper, he says, these master masons tried twice to reach the treasure and failed, but on the 3rd attempt, they obtained it. Sound familiar? And Adamson continues, he's pictured above. Similarly, Joseph Smith returned to the hill Cumorah once each year for 3 years, and on the 4th year, he was allowed to take the treasure or the golden plates home. So that's a similarity. Okay, there's also some similarities between the story of Hiram Abiff, the main Mason, and Joseph Smith. This is from Professor Adamson again. Like the story of Hiram Abiff, Joseph Smith was assailed 3 times, but unlike the unfortunate Hiram, Joseph was able to knock down his assailants and keep the treasure safe. In Hiram's story, his head was cut off, similar to the story of King Laban in the Book of Mormon. King Laban also had the brass plates. So is there a connection there? Not 100% sure, but there's some similarities. And Reed Durham talked about this. Hiram Abiff's head was cut off with his own knife, and Laban had his head cut off by his own sword. So another similarity. And Thomas Webb continues, they examined the place with diligence, but found nothing of note except a few pieces of marble upon which were engraved certain Egyptian hieroglyphics. So again, a similarity. Book of Mormon written in Reformed Egyptian. Book of Abraham translated from Egyptian hieroglyphs, just like in this case. Okay, he continues, the king sent for some person skilled in Egyptian hieroglyphic knowledge, and from their interpretation was fully assured that those pieces of marble were a part of the marble pillar that had been erected by Enoch. So 2 ideas come to mind here. A person skilled in Egyptian hieroglyphic knowledge, that person would be a person like Joseph Smith, who claimed to translate those things into the Book of Abraham. It could also be interpreted about the story of Charles Anton. Joseph Smith sent some characters from the golden plates to Charles Anton, and he was a person skilled in Egyptian hieroglyphics to explain what they were. Okay, going back to Michael W. Homer's book, just as Freemasons referred to the restoration of Enoch's plate as the keystone of Freemasonry, Joseph Smith stated that the Book of Mormon was the keystone of our religion. So another similarity. All right, back to the Tanners. The parallels to the Book of Mormon should be obvious to all those who are acquainted with that book. To begin with, Enoch was supposed to have recorded the secrets of Masonry on a plate of gold and a pillar of brass. And the Tanners continue. Of course, according to Joseph Smith, the Book of Mormon was written upon gold plates. That's in the Pearl of Great Price. And the Book of Mormon itself says that the ancient Nephites also had plates of brass. And both of the Mormons and the Masons say that the sacred writings were concealed in a hill. In the Masonic legend concerning Enoch, the cavern which held the gold plate was covered with a large stone. In Joseph Smith's story, he also claimed that the gold plates were buried under a stone of considerable size. It's also in the Pearl of Great Price. And in the Masonic legend, it was this large cavern where they put the treasure. Apostle Heber C. Kimball also said something similar to that in 1856. He says, "How does it compare with the vision that Joseph and others had when they went into a cave inside the hill Cumorah and saw more records than 10 men could carry?" So that's interesting. There are some accounts that it wasn't just a small box, but it was a cave that was inside the hill Cumorah with a whole bunch of plates, Urim and Thummim, Liahona, swords, and all kinds of stuff as pictured above. And the prophet Brigham Young said something very similar in 1877. He said, "When Joseph got the plates, the angel instructed him to carry them back to the hill Cumorah, which he did." Oliver Cowdery says that when Joseph and Oliver went there, the hill opened and they walked into a cave in which there was a large and spacious room. So that'd be more similar to the legend of Enoch. Okay, another statement by the Tanners. Joseph Smith must have really identified with Enoch, for in some of his revelations he used the code name Enoch for himself. You can find that in D&C 78, 92, 96, and 104 in the 1835 edition. These code names were removed in the 1981 edition of the Doctrine and Covenants. Enoch was one of the names that Joseph Smith gave himself. Another one was Gezelam. Gezelam, I'm not sure how to say that, was another code name as pictured above. Okay, another similarity pointed out by Michael Homer. By Joseph Smith's own account, he was the same age when he organized the Church of Christ in 1830 as Enoch was when he received the Melchizedek priesthood. That was age 25. And another statement by Homer. The instruments and plates which Joseph Smith found in the hill Cumorah and translated into the Book of Mormon were brought to the New World from the same location where Enoch had buried his treasure in the Old World. And you can see this in Ether, chapters 2, 3, and 15. And that's basically it. We've gone over quite a few of the parallels between the legend of Enoch and Joseph Smith's story of discovering and translating the golden plates into the Book of Mormon. So that's going to do it for this video. And I thank you for watching the parallels between the legend of Enoch and Joseph Smith video.